Hello and welcome back to my model railroad. As you can see here, I've been laying some track for track 3 on the left-hand side of the layout, and I'm up to this crossover piece right here. Now what I wanted to do with this series of videos, or this series of little video bites that I'll splice together, is go into the process that I use to lay track. I'm sure there are better ways, and maybe even easier ways. This is the process that I've been using. It's worked all right so far. I certainly welcome any, tips, tricks, and comments that anybody has in a way that I can improve. And I figured I'd just walk through it step by step. Since I don't have a camera person handy, and since I don't have any other type of high quality video capability, it's probably going to be a little bunch of small little clips of me doing things. And I'm just going to have to try to splice them all together. So I apologize in advance for the quality. I did look at some of my older videos and realized they look pretty grainy, so I'm recording this one on a slightly higher resolution, so we'll see if that makes a difference as well. For starters, I just wanted to mention, here's the crossover piece, and I think it looks pretty good. I didn't quite space it out correctly right here. I might put this other piece of road bed in here just to help kind of visually balance where the center line of this track comes out. But one thing I did want to mention is one of the decisions that I made was not to solder these rail joiners joining to the crossover piece. I'm concerned that soldering, this close, all this extra plastic right here might melt the plastic and just kind of make the whole thing look not so great. So what I have to start with is the smaller piece of track here. And this was left over from this, it's the other half of this piece here. I want to use the smaller piece just because it'll help the flex track sit nicer in the rest of this run as we move towards the right-hand side of the layout. And once again, I'm sure everybody already knows, but the flex track really only flexes well on the one side of the track. So what this little half piece will let me do is have, the curve come in, stop, then have one piece, curve up, stop, and then have another piece come in and finish the curves. So that way I'm only ever bending the flex track in one piece and around one curve in one direction. You can see this piece here, I did go ahead and do a whole S curve with just one piece of flex track. It's a pretty shallow S, so I didn't worry about it too much. But this, actually my original piece of track, this to here is one piece of flex track, but as you can see, I actually cut it here, just to kind of help make that very, very sharp transition to S. These are both approximately 18-inch radius. This one might be a little bit greater, but I was just worried that, bending too much as we come across here was going to bend too much of the flex track. So for starters, I have this piece here, which I have yet to caulk down, and I'm going to be working on adding the next piece of flex track. So what I always do first is I come and I remove the end ties from the flex tracks. You can see here, these two ties are grouped together pretty well. And on the opposite side of the flex track, the single tie and then these other two here. And what I do is I remove these three ties on this end and these two ties here on this end. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oh, and also wanted to mention before I get started, here are the various tools I'll be using. Using this pair of wire strippers, it works pretty well for nipping the plastic ties. This pair of the small pair of pliers, I use these to help place some of the sections of the ties once I'm caulking. Caulking gun and clear drying caulk. Screwdriver, the battery's charging over there. And I'll also be using my jeweler's file a little bit to clean up some of the rails. My rail nippers, you can see here. And the final item is my Weller soldering gun. And this is, fine solder that has a lead-free core. Okay, so here are the removed sections of the railroad ties. And if you can see here, they each have these little nibs that grip onto the rail. You won't be able to slide these ties into position with those nibs there, so I'm going to use a snap blade to very carefully either, kind of whittle them off or just kind of very, very slowly saw off those little nibs. Now be careful, you're dealing with a knife. I've cut my thumb a few times, nothing terrible. And I'm going to, like I said, pause and put this down while I do this. Okay, and here's what they look like cleaned up. You can see they're a little bit smoother straight across. I know it's kind of hard to see as it focuses. So now these will sit flat underneath the rails when it's time to add in the railroad ties later. So my next step is, typically I would already have this piece caulked down. Because this is a straightaway, I didn't bother. I usually leave a couple inches, maybe about 6 or 8 inches from the end, so I'd stop my caulking here. I'm just going to caulk this along with the second piece that I'm going to show you how I install now. So the next step is to actually go ahead and run some feed wires for the next set of power rail joiners. I soldered these up previously, and what I'm doing is I'm calling the red my right rail. So I've started from where my future rail yard is going to be. Trains are going to run clockwise. So, here the right rail is on this side, and then after it loops around, and then we're going back this way, the right rail is still on the right hand side of this layout because the trains are running in that direction. So what I'm going to do is drill a hole through the cork, through the foam, and then through the table, and then stick these feeder wires. These are approximately 10 inches long, longer than they need to be, but that'll suffice for what we need right now. I can always cut them later. This is 18 gauge wire. It's stiff, it's solid core wire, so that way it'll be easier to stuff down through the hole. Just also be careful. Notice how when I solder these wires on the wires on the side of the rail joiners, they stick out to one side. So what I'm going to do is bend these so that way they look like this. So I'm not drilling the hole in the middle of the rail joiner. I'm drilling it at the end of the rail joiner. So what I want to do is pre-position the rail joiner at the end of my tie right here, center the rail joiner on the edge of the tie, and then I'd be drilling my hole right here. So that's just about half a rail joiner length away from the end of my rail there. So you can see now I didn't quite get it exactly in the middle, but that's okay. I've already inserted the red wire, and with the rail joiner sitting on top of there, you really can't even see the wire, which is the approach that I'm going for. So this way you won't even actually see the feeder wires at all. Feed these down into the layout, down into the table. And as you can see here, if I go underneath the layout, you can see the wire sticking down there with the red one on the right-hand side. Okay, now the next step is to go and start feeding in your new piece of track. Now, once again, we want to make sure that the flexing direction, this upper piece here, is going to be in the shortest end of the arc, the shorter end radius part of the arc. So that would be the interior of the arc. So we're going this way with the flex track. This is the flexing rail. So what I would do first is before I put these rail joiners here, I would use the rail nippers to go ahead and cut a small piece of any piece of the rail that's sticking out and that isn't even. After you go around some turns, we'll see it on the other end. I don't need to do it here because this is pretty straight, but I'll show you an example of what happens once we get this assembled. Okay, and now I have the rails assembled here. You can see that they fit pretty snugly in the rail joiners. You also have to be careful sometimes when you're soldering up underneath on the rail joiners, or if the rail joiner heats up or gets bent, the rails aren't going to slide nicely together. If they don't, stop. Don't force the rails. You don't want to distort the rails if you can. Just take the rail joiner and take either your pair of the wire strippers that I'm just using as cutters, or take your small pliers here and actually grab the corner of the rail joiners and just bend them open them up. You can always then crimp them back over the rail when you're done. Or rail joiners are pretty cheap. Just go get another rail joiner. So now the next step, as you can see here, is the track needs to be bent around that curve. So that's where our trusty T-pins are going to come in handy. Now, for this piece, because I roughly know what the track is going to look like, I'm not going to bother T-pinning the track in place to begin with, because I know that I'll be able to make this curve. I will, however, be T-pinning the track in place once it is caulked down onto the roadbed. So my next step is actually going to be soldering these two rails together. These two pieces of track together on the rail joiners. So I'm going to go ahead and get the soldering iron set up, or the soldering gun set up. I know I'm capped at around 15 minutes per video. I'm looking at the counter now, I'm up to 10. So I think I'm going to split this video into multiple parts. This will be part 1. I plan on uploading them all fairly quickly, but just in case I don't get to it for a little bit, then I will see you next time.